freaking out. Trying to get your head around the fact that me and you in love is there. See how I'm tripping now. Can't decide what you really want from me. You a shout now. Up your altercations, getting upset in your desperation, screaming and hollering. And this love becomes our paper thin. You're playing so hard to get. You're making me sweat just to hold your attention. I can't give you nothing more if you ain't nothing to me. Yeah, love you, to be like
Good evening, everyone. I am Juliana Yee, and I have the distinct honor of serving as the Assistant Dean of Yale College and Director of the Asian American Cultural Center. Established in 1981, the AACC is celebrating its 40th anniversary throughout 2021 and is the third oldest cultural center of its kind on a college campus. On behalf of the AACC, it is my sincere pleasure to welcome all of you, students, staff, faculty, alumni, and friends, to tonight's 2021 Pan Asian American Heritage Month keynote event featuring Alice Wong. Before we proceed with the rest of this evening, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the lands on which we are settled upon. We are joining this Zoom event from many places today and want to acknowledge the ancestral homelands and in traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who have been here since time immemorial, and to recognize that we must continue to build our solidarity and kinship with Native peoples across the Americas and the globe. Yale University and the Asian American Cultural Center, located in New Haven, Connecticut, acknowledges that Indigenous peoples and nations, including the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Pagasuit, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac and other Algonquin speaking peoples have stewarded through nations and generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We also want to acknowledge that this country would not exist if it was not for the free and slave labor of Black people. We honor the legacy of the African diaspora and Black life, knowledge, and skills stolen due to violence and white supremacy. I also want to thank AACC Assistant Director Shiraz Iqbal and AACC Graduate Assistant Dana Liu for their support behind the scenes in making this evening's event a success. The AACC is also extremely grateful to our co-sponsors of tonight's event, the Asian Network at Yale, Diversability at Yale, Student Accessibility Services, Belonging at Yale, and the Association of Asian American Yale Alumni. Before I introduce tonight's student moderator, who will in turn welcome our featured guests, I would be remiss not to take this opportunity to acknowledge that it was this time last year that Yale sent students home on spring break, not knowing that a pandemic would alter the university and our lives in unimaginable ways. While the viral pandemic brought the world to a grinding halt, it is also further illuminated the ongoing racism pandemic and its impact on Asian, Black, Latinx, and Indigenous bodies. I believe it also laid bare the many ways in which our systems and efforts of inclusion continue to fall short of serving marginalized populations within our society. I hope our keynote tonight and other PAM events will push us to think more deeply about what true solidarity should look like in our day-to-day lives. I'm grateful for the ways in which both our student moderator and guest speaker tonight have been fierce advocates for building a world where accessibility is understood as an act of love instead of a burden or an afterthought. It is my hope that tonight's conversation will also serve as a reminder that it is part of all our responsibility to create spaces that are access-centered, because isolation undermines any efforts towards achieving collective liberation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our student moderator, Arya Singh. Arya is a junior in Pauli Murray College, majoring in the history of science, medicine, and public health, and pursuing the education studies certificate. Outside of class, Arya is on the New Haven Commission for Disabilities, the president of the Yale Undergraduate Legal Aid Association, and a teaching assistant for health economics and public policy. Arya herself has grown up with a disability, which makes her especially excited, grateful for, and inspired by Alice Wong's work and insights. So take it away, Arya.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Aria. I'm so excited to be here. And I think I speak for everyone when I say that we are so, so grateful to be joined by Alice Wong as our keynote speaker for the AACC's Pan Asian American Heritage Month. This month set out to provide events that will push us to think more deeply about what solidarity looks like in everyday life within our Asian and Asian American communities. And I truly think that there's no more powerful, illuminating, and inspiring way to do that than with Alice's story and critical work related to disability activism. Alice identifies as a disabled activist, media maker, and consultant. She's the founder and director of the Disability Visibility Project, which is a project that we're going to speak at great length about tonight. And she's also a co-partner in other organizations such as StoryCorps, Disabled Writers, Criplet, Crip the Vote, and Access is Love. These projects are all committed to giving activists with disabilities the opportunities to share their stories and be active members of political processes. To name only a few, Alice has been published in the New York Times. She served as a member on the National Council on Disability, appointed by President Obama, and was named by the Time magazine as one of 16 people fighting for equality in America. So with that, let's get started. The first half will be a moderated Q&A, after which we'll open up our discussion to the audience to ask questions using the Q&A Zoom feature. So everyone please help me in welcoming Alice.
Hey everyone. Hi Aria. Hi everyone. Happy Year of the Ox, and what a strange year it's been so far. I have to be honest and say that, I thought 2020 was a shit year, and yet here we are in March, and things aren't really looking better just yet. So this is really a highlight of my week. And I want to thank Juliana Yee and just everyone involved in putting this event together. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to be in conversation with you, Aria.
Awesome. Okay, so then let's get started if that's okay. So I think, one of your biggest projects is probably the Disability Visibility Project, which I'm hoping you can explain a little bit more, but just to give kind of a one sentence overview to everyone, it's essentially an online community that's dedicated to creating and sharing and giving a voice to disability media and culture by serving as a platform and impetus to encourage people with disabilities to use their agency and autonomy to share their stories. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that and also what motivated you to start the Disability Visibility Project.
Yeah, so I think the very beginning, it was 2014, and, I created this partnership with StoryCorps, as you mentioned. It's a national oral history nonprofit. And this was the year before the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And at that time, there were other, disability rights organizations kind of gearing up, getting ready, because it's a landmark anniversary. And at that time, I'm just one community member. And I thought, oh, what can I do? And, I'm just one person. I'm not part of a thing. And, one thing that always really annoyed me and, really something I thought was problematic is the fact that disability history isn't taught in high school. It's it's rarely taught in history, even at the college level. There are disability studies courses at universities, but it's not widespread. It's not like in every university. You have to actually seek it out. And I thought, this is something that we need more of. And why do we have to wait for historians or academics to notice us or to value us? And StoryCorps is this way that anybody can record a story with a friend or a loved one. And they have a partnership with the Library of Congress so that they can archive these oral histories. And that to me was the real hook. It's like anybody can just create history. That's super empowering and super exciting. So I launched it as just this 1 year project. I was just going to interview some friends and use social media to see if I could get other people to do it. And we, as of yet, as of this year, have about 140 total histories. So that feels pretty good that we have this little archive of the 21st century. And then, I started a website, and basically it snowballed. Like, people had a real interest and hunger in telling their stories. So I quickly kind of expanded, and I wrote essays. I have just essays. Started a podcast in 2017. So I try to be kind of using different platforms, different formats, just different ways to show like how there's so many of us, and in particular how there's so many of us from so many different communities. That's the thing about disability that I think is so awesome and like unique, is that every community has disabled people in it. So we really are a cross section of society. And I do want to say that I think the overall coverage and kind of representation of disability, whether it's in media or pop culture, is still overwhelmingly white. So as a disabled Asian American woman, I also have this kind of like saltiness and wanting to really kind of push back at that.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I really feel like, when I looked at it, it was just super powerful to see. So I really appreciated seeing that. What I found most compelling about DVP was its commitment to sharing experiences. I think advocacy can often feel disjointed and independent and can leave people feeling alone with kind of the weight of the world on their shoulders. And so I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share what from your experiences made you feel like this collaborative component was worth making such a critical part of your work?
Yeah, definitely. I think, number one, the DVP is a one-person operation. So like, I'm just like messing around, just, having fun. But I feel like a lot of what I do that gives me joy. And I think that's also like, the lesson that I should share with people is just, advocacy should be a pleasure, should be a joy. I feel like a lot of people don't get into advocacy because they think, oh, I have to follow these rules, I have to use certain words, I have to do certain things. Like there's just one way to be an advocate. And I feel like there's just so much room to change it and to make what you care about and to have more control over. You can make advocacy whatever you want. There really should be much more kind of flexibility about that. And I feel like people feel so daunted by it. Even myself, I think for many years, I didn't identify as an activist because I think, the perception of an activist is somebody that's, attending rallies, organizing rallies, knocking on doors, going to protests. But that's one part of it. That's not the only part of it. And, I think storytelling is very political. And the way we share information, whether it's just one-on-one with a friend or through social media or other means, I think this is a way to educate, but also really have a kind of purpose. So that to me is what's gives me joy, because I love my community and I just want to share it. And I feel like that's the things that's kind of like a hybrid of what I do. I create content, but I also really love to like share content. And I feel like all of this is part of this broader advocacy kind of effort. And I think, people just shouldn't feel beholden to do anything. I feel like sometimes people as, Asian Americans, people of color, disabled people, we're still marginalized and still have to fight. And, this is where the weird tensions of obligation, and I feel like I want a future where people don't have to fight so hard just to exist, just to survive. But for the moment, I think I've always was an African because I was born in a non-disabled world, and the world steeped in whiteness. And this is the situation it is now. But we can move to a better future.
Absolutely. Another one of your projects, which I thought was especially incredible, was your ADA 30 in color, which was, as I understand it, like a series of essays kind of about the history of disability rights and justice by disabled Black, Indigenous, people of color writers. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that and the process of what that was like to make it and curate that.
Yeah, thanks for asking me. It also goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the beginnings of the DVP, looking at the 25th anniversary. I think at that time, and even still now, when people think about the ADA or the history of disability rights, they could think maybe like 3, 4, 5 people maybe that were major figures, and basically they're all white. And I think there's a lot of work to be done within the disability rights movement in terms of really differentiating of its whiteness and its centering on, especially at the very beginning, on physically disabled people, because clearly there's so many different types of disabilities and different groups who have been excluded. And, the disability justice framework only developed maybe like 5 to 10 years ago. And this is a different kind of, for the audience who's wondering what is disability justice and what's different from disability rights. Disability justice looks at, was really primarily created by disabled people of color and queer disabled people. And this is a different look at how do we move together? How do we be in solidarity? How do we create a different kind of world that's not centered on like rights? Because I think a rights-based framework depends on the state, and that's limited in a lot of ways. So I do want to encourage folks to learn more about disability justice, because it really is centered on principles of interdependence, principles on wholeness, that we are perfect and whole as we are, that we are in solidarity with one another, and that disability justice is inherently anti-capitalist, and that liberation only comes about when we move together, when we don't leave anybody behind. And that to me really resonated greatly with me. So when ADA 30 rolled around last year, about January of 2020, pre-pandemic, I already put a call for stories. And I really wanted to only focus it on BIPOC disabled people. Because again, every time 88th anniversary rolls around, which is on July of every year, you see the same old stories. And I really wanted to open it up to critiques, to the way we live now, to what's ahead. Because I think sometimes, we have these like, different kind of like heritage months, different kind of awareness months. And sometimes it feels a little stale. Like it's just, is awareness enough? Is all these things, is it really enough? How do we really harness this as a chance to be reflective, but also to think about the work ahead? So I think that to me is something that really made me happy to see, like these amazing essays. And they were looking back at disability rights in the 88. Some folks were very like appreciative, but others were much more critical, because for many folks, the ADA didn't really make a difference. The ADA or disability rights, the disability community didn't welcome disabled people of color. There were experiences I had as well, that where sometimes as a disabled person of color, sometimes you make you feel like you can't bring your whole self. And that to me is one of the most kind of important thing, that whether you're in an APA space or disability space or just any social justice space, that's you can be yourself and talk about all the things that are important to you. And I think that's kind of the real goal, is that people are who they are, that they're accepted as they are.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that kind of lends into my next question, which is, I guess, a little bit more of a macro question in terms of how do you see intersections between advocacy related to disability and race come into conversation? And what has that been like for you to kind of move that work forward?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the thing that I hope all people really think about when they think about intersectionality, which is almost, become a buzzword now. I've seen it really, people forget to cite the work of Black feminist scholars and thinkers like Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the concept, because now I see people using it almost as, in place of diversity. And it's really not, you can't just, throw that in. When you're really talking about diversity, you just say the word diversity. And, just really thinking about the different axes of oppression, that's intersectionality, that is not diversity. So I feel like this is something that's still kind of sad, that we have to really kind of explain this to people, especially white folks. And I think that's something that I've lived, just my whole life. It's who I am in terms of all of the things that kind of impact my life. I can't separate the ableism, sexism, or racism, right? And I think when we look at the major kind of crises and issues of our times, sometimes things get erased. For example, with the whole uprisings last year with Black Lives Matter, I don't know if people really think about the large percentage of Black and Brown people who've been killed or brutalized by police are also people with disabilities or health conditions. Disability, I see it everywhere. And I think that's something that's sometimes still gets kind of downplayed, and I feel like that's something that's within APA spaces, we really need to kind of not forget and not exclude. For example, like, APA spaces and APA communities, mental health is still very much a taboo, still very much stigmatized, and I feel like there's so much that needs to be uplifted because anybody who wants to work toward social justice, to work toward liberation, we gotta think about all of the people who still don't feel welcome or don't feel that they can really fully be vulnerable and honest about who they are.
Absolutely. I guess kind of as a follow-up question to that, how do you think that we can make racial advocacy more inclusive of people with disabilities? And where do you see the gaps in that right now?
Yeah, I would say some of the gaps, first of all, like use the word disability. Talk about it. Like just say the word. This is something that gets skirted around still. There's a lot of folks who are just hesitant to use this word. And they'd rather use euphemisms, special needs, differently abled, things like that. And I really hope that folks in racial justice movements think about ableism within the movements, right? I see a lot of well-meaning progressives use really ableist terms like crazy or lame. And these are things that are not cool. I just, with our previous president, there was a whole lot of conversation about his mental instability. And, people were just laughing and just like making it like this is a great way to like critique the president. And people don't realize how harmful that is to disabled people with mental health disabilities. So I would say that people should learn about ableism. People should learn about kind of unlearning ableist language and thinking. And then also be explicit about welcoming disabled people to be co-partners, co-conspirators, and to actually be involved in the organizing. And I think any movement that includes disabled people is going to create a more inclusive movement. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this person on TikTok. His name is Nick Cho. He's also known as Your Korean Dad. So he and I are actually Twitter friends. And one day, I watch his TikToks. I'm a fan of his. And I noticed with his hashtags, he was using them in an inaccessible way. So I slid into his DMs and I said, hey, would you be open to doing a TikTok to talk about hashtag accessibility? And, I didn't really hear back. I thought he gets a lot of DMs like this, But just the other day, I just put in the chat box. He did a TikTok about hashtag accessibility. And that to me is also, a sign of solidarity, a sign of somebody who has huge influence, who is really open to learning and also using his platform for change. So, I think this is an example of really simple things that any person, whether they're an advocate or not, can do. So just there's a lot of different practices that are really simple that earlier I put a link for Access is Love, and we created documents, different ways that people can incorporate access very, immediately. And we have a lot of other resources for movement work, community organizing, organizing events that can be more accessible. So there's a ton of resources there. And that would be the first place to go, or some of the first steps.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think I already see some questions in the Q&A box, so maybe we'll transition now into the questions posed by the audience, if that's okay. So I think the first one is actually one that we were emailed earlier today. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about what you think local and state and national governments and advocates can do to increase access and political participation for people with disabilities through the online meetings that we're all having to go through together, especially in the last year.
Yeah, I think it's still a challenge for disabled people to participate. The last presidential election, there were still a lot of barriers. And this is still really wild to me. That's for 30 years after the ADA, and there's still a lot of significant barriers just to vote, on top of like civic and political participation. A lot of people still don't have the means to vote privately and independently. Last November, there were, I think, 10 states that were sued because, blind people and other people with print disabilities could not access a ballot, an absentee ballot, without needing assistance. So these are real structural barriers that still exist. There are still voting polling places that are inaccessible, which is really just like wild, right? It's like the bar is so low in a lot of ways. I would also say that, in terms of people running for office, clearly the way elections are set up, and the amount of money you need, campaign financing, it's a huge deterrent for a lot of people who are rich, right? Like there's just, a lot of disabled people live, close or near below the poverty level. And yet, this is a major group that should be so important and, just to really highlight and be really necessary to reflect all of who we are as a country. So, I really do hope to see more disabled people running for office or just being involved in public service. But still, I think that the workplace, being able to participate remotely or having flexible work, flexible work times is just still a challenge. And I think that's where the little silver lining is with this pandemic. As disabled students have often, for years, have fought for remote learning or just access to online curriculum. Yes, a lot of the online curriculum was not accessible either. So I really do hope that as universities and different institutions, as we hopefully come out of this pandemic, that we will keep a lot of these things that we've done to survive and adapt, because I think the more options we have to participate, the better it's going to be. We just need more choices. access is different for everyone. So we gotta really be mindful of that.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so one question in the chat box is, generally speaking, many disabled individuals, especially disabled individuals of color, have experienced the loss and horror of the COVID-19 pandemic in remarkably different ways from white able-bodied individuals. To you, what has it meant to be a disabled individual during this past year? And if you can, and then a very related question, so I think it might be best if we combine them, is just if you can, shed some insight on what you think the discrepancy is between the experience of able-bodied and then disabled people throughout the last year.
Oh, this is a good question. I love it because, as a writer and as an activist, last year, I feel like the ableism and eugenics has really been more explicit than ever. So basically, the message and the actions by the states have really shown how disposable disabled people are. And not just disabled people, but clearly communities of color. Like clearly Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities that have been disproportionately impacted. Let's not forget that about 40% of deaths from the pandemic, from the COVID virus, happened in long-term care facilities. So these are older and disabled people who are not protected, who are not valued because of their age or disability. And I still don't see the outcry, the outrage about this, because there have been leaders who say, oh, this virus is just a bad flu, or if you're young and healthy, it's okay. Or sometimes it's grandma's time. Like there were literally politicians who said that, so I tried my best to share my story as somebody that uses a ventilator who is clearly at high risk about what this pandemic has meant to me, how it's impacted me, and then try to use my podcast and social media to really tell the stories about other people too, because people with chronic illnesses, people with all kinds of disabilities are really at high risk. And, here we are now in March 2021, and the vaccine rollout has been a hot mess. It's just been garbage, really. In my state in particular, our governor he removed this third tier of prioritization, which included people with disabilities under 65. So I basically was extremely pissed off and created a hashtag. I'm gonna type it in here at the chat box. High risk CA. So I wanted to share with the world in a very public way that this is not acceptable and that we deserve to be prioritized before the public, because the governor, like many other governors, are under pressure to restart the economy. So they want to move toward age-based eligibility, where they'll do different groups by age. But what if you're a person with a chronic illness in your 20s? Like, are you gonna wait? Like, how long is it going to be until the summer or fall until you get the vaccine? That is absolutely going to result in deaths. And also people like me who are not disabled don't realize that for a lot of people with disabilities, we've been sheltering at home and staying as safe as possible and not been out very rarely, unless, absolutely necessary. I am somebody who's been sheltering from since last March until now, and I've only been out once in October for the flu vaccine. Like, that's how unsafe it is. And people don't realize that the costs, right? That there's a lot of things about our health, things that we've been delaying, treatments, surgeries, maintenance, self-care, wellness that we can't do because it's simply too unsafe. And that will also have permanent consequences. It's not just the risk of dying, but it's the risk of having our conditions worsened because we have not been vaccinated yet. So for me, vaccine equity, well, absolutely, we have to talk about medical racism, race in particular, and class, but we cannot forget about disability when we think about vaccine equity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, another question in the chat box is, I would like to work in disability advocacy. I used to volunteer with a well-respected disability advocacy nonprofit and interned at the Student Disability Center when I was in graduate school. However, I haven't had success in finding a professional position with a disability advocacy organization. I have a disability too. What can I do?
Yeah, I think this is I think there's more ways to want to be an advocate. You can also team up with other kind of organizations and other nonprofits and bring your perspective and your expertise as a disabled person. Like, that's disability advocacy as well. Maybe you're passionate about public transit, climate change, anything. Think about that. Like, you're not just, disability advocacy doesn't only belong in this silo of disability rights nonprofits and groups. I feel like there's a lot more space now. Like, I feel like, beyond centers for independent living, which are community-based organizations that are in every state, I think there's a lot of room for being a disabled advocate wherever you go. So I think that would be my advice. Because these groups, they're all well and good, but I don't really think that they should be the only place for representation for us and by us. I think there's also ways you can connect with individual disabled people and just create different groups on your own. Things that are informal, that whether you make it a nonprofit or not, you can actually mobilize and organize together. And there's a lot of, I think, online advocacy that happens on social media that's just as valid, that's just as real, and that's just as significant. So one example of that is a co-partnership with my friends called Trip the Vote. So I'm gonna drop the hashtag there in the link. So this is something that my friends Andrew Polray and Greg Barrington and I, we just created this on the fly. Like, we created this in 2015, and we're just three individuals who were passionate about disability issues, passionate about political participation, and wanted to use Twitter as a way of community organizing, as a way of creating space for us to have dialogue. And this did not come with any structure. We have zero funding. We have zero we're not an organization. And yet I think we've made a pretty big difference. And, that to me is one example of the ways to do this work with or without any sort of institutional affiliation. And then, sometimes when you do this stuff, you will get noticed, and then that often leads toward professional opportunities as well. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but AAPD is a national organization that you might want to look into. They offer these summer internships. It's the Association of Americans with People with Disabilities. So I would try to check out that organization first to see like who they're connected with and see if there are any opportunities there. And there's also a lot of other disability specific groups as well. So there's just a lot out there that are both national and local that might be an option.
Great. I think that was super, super helpful to all of us wanting to help kind of work in disability advocacy. Maybe we can do 2 more questions if that's okay with you.
Sure thing.
Perfect. So the next one is, what are some ways in which we can go about the work of destigmatizing disability and mental illness within BIPOC and other non-white communities?
Well, that is the big question, right? I mean, that is the really hard part. There's still so many people that are silenced, like deliberately silenced, and also deliberately ignored and excluded. And that to me is why, like, I try to, publish and amplify as many stories out there, because I want people to feel like they're not alone if they are disabled or somebody with a mental illness. And if, what's still really sad is that because ableism is so pervasive, that we tell ourselves all the time that we are the only ones, or nobody understands, or that maybe I'm not disabled enough, right? There's a lot of people with non-apparent disabilities who feel like, oh, like, what if people think I'm not disabled enough? Or just, that to me is also one of these internalized things that's really hard to undo. And I think part of it is because we don't see ourselves. And that's another reason why visibility is so important. But again, it's a reminder that visibility comes at a cost, right? It's not all fun and games. It's still very difficult and frankly dangerous for a lot of people. So for those who are not disabled, they really want to be allies. It's to really articulate these things, to really be explicit about being welcoming, and to also take critiques. And like, if people are telling you, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about why don't you have a disabled person at this event? Or why don't you have captioning and interpreters at your own light events, or just think about like different ways that emotionally communicate. Like, are you using the language to be really representative of everyone in your community? So allies who are able to like take this feedback, really learn from it, and really learn to do better, that's part of hopefully the solution. And yes, I don't think anybody who has any sort of disability should feel the need to disclose, or to identify, because it takes time. Everybody has to really get to that place where they feel comfortable. And maybe not everybody is going to get there. So there should not be any sort of pressure in that sense either.
Great, thank you so much. There's still a few questions in the chat box, and I wish we could get to all of them, but kind of in closing, I guess, would you be willing to talk about what you hope to see happen in the space of racial justice and disability advocacy, and what you think the people in this room can do to help make that happen?
Well, I do hope that everybody thinks about not really think only about racism and how do we really think about fighting systemic racism only solely within race, right? We really have to really widen our scope and think about how all of the intersections really do impact the experience of racism. And I think that would be just my biggest takeaway, that it's much more nuanced, I think when we think about right now what's happening within AP communities and the hate and violence and the xenophobia that so many of our communities are experiencing right now, that we do factor in age, we do factor in disability, we do factor in gender, just all of these things really do contribute to the experience of racism. And I think the solutions must also come from that perspective as well. So maybe that's not a solution, but that's a place to start.
Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. Again, I know I speak for everyone that we are so grateful that you did take the time and that you were willing to share your experiences and insights and story with us. It was incredibly moving. I think I will hand it over to Director Iqbal to kind of end us out. But yeah, thank you so much again for everything.
Thank you, Aria. It's been a delight to be in conversation with you. You're the next generation. I'm so here and ready for whatever you do. And I'm really excited about the future. I think these conversations are part of the work, and I want to plant seeds everywhere and hand it off to the next generation. That's what it's all about. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Aria, for really helping us and moderating that amazing work. Hi, everyone. My name is Shiraz, and I am the Assistant Director for the Asian American Cultural Center and the co-chair for the Asian Network at Yale. I want to thank our keynote speaker, Alice Wong, for talking with us tonight, answering our questions, inspiring me, and I'm sure each and every one of you. Disabled narratives are important and do matter. And I'm happy to hear the many ways community members can engage, from sharing their oral histories to connecting with one another on social media. Please be sure to stay informed by visiting disabilityvisibilityproject.com to read the latest posts, follow their blog, and follow Alice on social media as well. I want to thank everyone in attendance and joining me today to be part of such an amazing event led by an incredible individual. Our next PAM event will be the AACC Office of Career Strategies Alumni Mentors in Nonprofit Careers on Friday, March 12th at 6 p.m. So please be sure to check out our other events happening through our AACC newsletter, Facebook, and or Yale Connect page. Thank you again, and I hope everyone takes care and has a wonderful night. And thank you again, Alice, for speaking with us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone. Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank you.
Take care, Alice. Take care,
Take
Arya.
care, Alice.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks again. Thanks, Dana, too.
So much. It was awesome to hear.
Thanks, Arika and Travis and our captioner.
Thank you all.